Give me liberty or give me death. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Ask not what your country can do for you.
7 years ago,
America was built on courage, on imagination. The American flag is the most recognized symbol of freedom and democracy in the world.
Small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I want to begin with a place you've almost certainly never heard of. In June 1864, a tiny village at the intersection of the Appomattox and James Rivers in Virginia, the place had a population of a few dozen people. By July, it was one of the busiest ports on Earth, City Point, Virginia. The name barely registers in most Civil War histories, but what happened there in the summer of 1864 may be the most instructive story of the entire war. Not for the fighting, there was no battle at City Point, but for what the United States had become and how that affected the outcome of the war, despite 4 years of horrific bloodshed, all but inevitable. Now think about what this place was actually doing. On an average day during the siege of Petersburg, City Point received 40 steamers, 75 sailing ships, and over 100 barges. Their holds contained food, ammunition, clothing, medicine, lumber, horseshoes, telegraph wire, and 1,000 other items required to keep an army of nearly 100,000 men and 65,000 horses alive and combat effective. On any given day, the depot held 9 million meals, 20 days of animal forage. The bakery at City Point produced 100,000 loaves of bread every day, fresh bread delivered to the front. The railroad connecting the wharf to the siege lines, 21 miles of track, was built in 22 days. And remember who built it. The 3,000 men who worked the wharves were mostly free slaves. Across the lines, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was slowly starving. This was not luck, this was not geography. This was the accumulated productive capacity of a free labor, of a free market and the American economy. This logistical force was applied to the problem of sustaining an army in the field. This is the story of how industry won the Civil War. I want to walk through something that I think gets glossed over in most Civil War narratives. Before the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter in April 1861, the outcome was, in industrial terms, already substantially written. By 1860, 90% of the nation's manufacturing output came from the northern states. Despite a lack of slavery, the North produced 17 times as much cotton and woolen textiles as the South, 30 times more leather goods, 20 times more pig iron, 32 times more firearms. There were 3,200 firearms produced in the North for every 100 produced in the South. Union states had roughly 5 times as many factories as the Confederacy and 10 times as many factory workers. Of approximately 30,000 miles of railroad in the United States in 1860, only about 9,000 lay in the future Confederacy. And in those southern lines you see, were not a network. They were short independent lines built to different gauges, pointing towards ports rather than connecting regions. At junction points, freight had to be physically unloaded from the train and loaded onto another. It was an agricultural logistical system designed to carry cotton to ships, not an industrial system capable of feeding armies. Now, before the war started, William Tecumseh Sherman began warning his Southern colleagues that secession would not be easy. For his part, he had never held a job for any meaningful amount of time. He worked as a banker, lawyer, educator, and food salesman. While in the South, he was superintendent at what would today be known as LSU. He stated that secession would not be easy in the South and that they were badly misjudging Northern resolve and industrial capacity. He is famous for saying, "You people of the South don't know what you are doing. This country will be drenched in blood." And of course he was right. You can see in the demographic numbers alone, 7/8 of foreign immigrants had settled in free states. They came for work, they came for wages. They came because a free labor economy offered something a slave economy structurally could not offer, the opportunity to rise. In much of the South, economic and social advancement remained tied to land ownership, entrenched family networks and the plantation system making upward mobility far more difficult for newly arrived immigrants with no capital or land. General Winfield Scott saw the numbers clearly enough to propose the Anaconda Plan. He was to blockade the southern ports, cut the Mississippi, squeeze the Confederacy economically, and then wait. The industrial capacity of the Union would do the rest. The blockade worked. Southern cotton exports fell by 95% from pre-war levels. The Confederacy was financially strained as early as 1862. The blockade also prevented the importation of salt. without which meat could not be preserved and leather could not be tanned. This left the armies without critical supplies such as shoes or harnesses, making their ability to conduct war nearly impossible. The Union created the United States Military Railroad Service to manage rail lines in captured Confederacy territory and build new lines where none existed. It started with 7 miles of track. By the end of the war, it controlled more than 2,000 miles of military railroads and had acquired 419 locomotives and 6,330 additional rail cars. And then came the moment that proved what the system could really do. The defining demonstration came in September 1863 after the disaster at Chickamauga left the Army of the Cumberland besieged in the Chattanooga. Secretary of War Stanton proposed moving 30,000 men from Virginia to Tennessee in 5 days. The military railroad superintendent said 7 days was more realistic. In the end, approximately 25,000 men covered 1,200 miles in 12 days, moving across 9 separate railroad companies coordinated under Central Military Command. Now compare that to what the Confederacy was doing at the same time. During this period, the Confederacy had moved 12,000 men over 800 miles in 12 days, half the number, 2/3 the distance in the same time. That gap in capability capacity was the war in miniature. European military planners were watching closely, and they drew the exact conclusions you would expect. The lessons of the Union Railroad logistics became the foundation of German and French strategic planning in the decades that followed. These massive mobilizations of 1914 trace directly back to what the United States military demonstrated, in their own time and for generations to come. Before the Civil War, a general in the field was, operationally speaking, alone. Orders travel only as fast as a horse. Intelligence arrived hours or days after the fact. The telegraph changed every one of those constraints, and I think it's hard for us today to fully grasp how revolutionary that was. For the first time in a major conflict, near real-time two-way communication was possible across hundreds of miles. Lincoln grasped this immediately. He had the military telegraph office moved to the War Department adjacent to the White House, and he spent hours there each day reading dispatches, sending orders, and staying informed on battles as they developed. He ordered 15,000 miles of new wire strung during the war. The Union's telegraph cipher, developed by Anson Sager, a civilian telegraph executive, was a word substitution and route transportation system that proved impenetrable to Confederate cryptoanalysts. Every high-value Union communication was encoded before transmission. The Confederacy spent 4 years unable to read them. Lincoln could receive intelligence directly from field commanders, bypassing generals who were slow or who had failed. He could see what was happening in real time, he could act, and that is, in other words, the difference between a modern command authority and the outdated Confederate one. There is a reason most Americans have never heard of Montgomery Meigs. His war was not fought with a rifle. It was fought with ledgers, depots, contracts, and supply chains. Meigs served as Quartermaster General of the Union Army from 1861 to 1882. Under his leadership, the Quartermaster Departments oversaw disbursement of $15 billion in procurement, the most complex logistical operation in American history to that point. He operated out of 16 major supply depots and supervised a system that grew in efficiency even as it penetrated deeper into hostile Confederate territory. Now here's what that meant to the individual soldier. All this detail tells you everything. Union troops became so confident in the resupply system that they routinely discarded excess clothing and equipment on long marches, certain it would be replaced. One army throws out overcoats, the other can't get boots. That is not a story about superior generalship. It is a story about economic systems. A free labor economy, organized around price signals and competitive enterprise. It built a manufacturing and distribution capability that a slave economy simply could not match. Sherman is remembered as a destroyer, and he was. His March to the Sea caused an estimated $100 million in damage and systematically dismantled Confederate rail infrastructure. But the less told story about Sherman is the logistical achievement that enabled the destruction. To march 100,000 men, 473 miles from Louisville to Atlanta, and then another 300 miles to the sea, without a navigable river or secure supply base, required a level of logistical planning that had never been seen in American military history. Sherman's supply line was a single-track railroad, the Western and Atlantic. Confederate cavalry raided it, partisan guerrillas cut out the telegraph lines, Confederate forces burned bridges, and behind Sherman's army, construction crews rebuilt them, sometimes within days. Sherman kept 1,000 rail cars and 100 locomotives on a single track. with a standing reserve of 20 days of rations for his entire force. His logistical goal was 130 supply loads to the front every day, a number he achieved. Grant, meanwhile, built what the Army called the most efficient supply depot in history. It was designed for not 125,000 men, but for a potential of 500,000. And that is the industrial mindset, almost exactly stated. Build more than you need today because tomorrow's requirements will exceed today's. There is a larger argument embedded in all of these logistical facts, and I think it deserves to be stated plainly. The founders wager that a republic of free individuals operating in a free market would outperform a hereditary aristocracy. An empire or a society organized around forced labor was being tested in the bloodiest way imaginable. And the answer came back in the supply figures from City Point and the troop movement logs from the United States military railroad system. Free men working for wages, competing in markets, innovating under economic pressure, it built a war machine that no slave economy could replicate. The Confederacy could and did breed the courage and produce the officers. It could not produce the boots. That is what the Civil War proved, at the cost of 620,000 American lives. The organizational models built by the Union did not go away when Appomattox was signed. The railroad logistics infrastructure became the backbone of the American transcontinental expansion. The telegraph network became the foundation of the commercial communication industry that would produce the American telephone system and eventually the internet. Montgomery Meig's depot system, built to create capacity ahead of need, create redundancy, and integrate transportation modes, is recognizable in every modern military logistics doctrine and every supply chain management system operating today. The founders built a republic capable of doing something extraordinary, converting free labor and free enterprise into capability, and capability into victory, at a scale and speed that confounded both rivals and allies. That is what American built means, not just something that was manufactured here, but that it carries accumulated knowledge, discipline, and ingenuity of a civilization that has been stress tested by the hardest problems the world has ever produced, and has consistently come back with something better. The industrial arsenal is always being built. The question is whether people building it understand what they are a part of. My hope is now you do.